Imagine buying a bottle of bourbon and having absolutely no idea what's inside. Not because the label was confusing, but because the label could be a lie. In the late 1800s, fake whiskey was everywhere. Some producers diluted it, some colored it, some mixed neutral spirits with flavorings and sold it as bourbon. Some sold young whiskey as old whiskey, and consumers had almost no way to know the difference. Bourbon had a trust problem, and one man decided to do something about it. His weapon wasn't a still, it wasn't a barrel, it wasn't a brand. It was a law that still appears on bourbon bottles more than a century later. Welcome to Sticks and Spirits, and this is Men Behind the Bottle. Today we're talking about the man many call the father of the modern bourbon industry, Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. Edmund Haynes Taylor Jr. was born in Kentucky in 1830. When he was only 5 years old, his father died. Young Edmund was sent to live with relatives connected to future President Zachary Taylor. He received an excellent education, and eventually he returned to Kentucky, where he entered the banking business. At first glance, banking seems like a strange path to bourbon, but it turned out to be the perfect education. As a banker, Taylor reviewed the books of distilleries throughout Kentucky. He saw what was succeeding, he saw what was failing, and he saw who made money, and he saw who made good whiskey. The deeper he looked into the bourbon business, the more convinced he became that there was an opportunity, not just to make whiskey, but to make better whiskey. Colonel Taylor became obsessed with quality. He traveled to Europe. He studied distilling methods and manufacturing techniques and equipment. When he returned to Kentucky, he began putting those ideas into practice. In 1869, he purchased the Leestown Distillery near Frankfort and renamed it O.F.C, Old Fire Copper Distillery. Taylor modernized everything: new equipment, improved fermentation, better grain handling, more efficient production. He believed that bourbon could be every bit as sophisticated as the great spirits of Europe, and his distillery reflected that belief. Today, bourbon fans know O.F.C by a different name, Buffalo Trace. But Taylor wasn't finished. After financial struggles and ownership disputes cost him control of O.F.C, he started over. Many people would have quit. Taylor built another distillery, and this one looked nothing like the factories of the day. In 1887, he opened the Old Taylor Distillery, complete with a limestone castle, landscaped grounds, and guided tours. Today, bourbon fans know that distillery as Castle and Key. More than a century before the Bourbon Trail existed, Taylor was inviting visitors to experience bourbon as something special. He wasn't just building distilleries, he was elevating bourbon itself. But the greatest challenge of his career still lay ahead. By the late 1800s, bourbon was booming, but unfortunately, so was fraud. Unscrupulous producers were selling products labeled as whiskey that barely resembled whiskey at all. Neutral spirits were blended with coloring. Flavorings were added. Labels made promises that the liquid couldn't keep. Honest distillers suffered. Consumers suffered. And confidence in American whiskey suffered. Taylor believed that quality producers should not have to compete against deception. More importantly, he believed consumers deserved to know what they were buying. So he began pushing for reform. And eventually, he found allies in Washington, D.C. In 1897, Congress passed the Bottled in Bond Act. Today, many bourbon drinkers see those words on a label and think of them as a marketing term. They are not. At the time, Bottled in Bond was revolutionary. Many historians consider it America's first federal protection law governing a food or beverage product. Think about that for a moment. Before the federal government regulated meat, before it regulated most packaged, before the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, one of the first products Washington stepped in to protect was bourbon. Not because bourbon was perfect, but because bourbon had become important enough to protect. For the first time, consumers had a standard they could trust. Now, to qualify as Bottled in Bond, a bourbon has to meet strict requirements. It has to come from one distillery. It has to be produced in one distilling season. It has to be aged for at least 4 years in a new oak barrel at a federally bonded warehouse. And it has to be bottled at exactly 100 proof. No shortcuts, no mystery, no deception, just whiskey. And for Taylor, that was the point. The law didn't exist to help dishonest producers. It existed to protect honest ones and to protect the people buying the bottle. Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. died in 1923, but the standards he fought for have never disappeared. Today, his legacy can be found all across bourbon country, at Buffalo Trace, at Castle and Key, on bottles bearing his name, and perhaps most importantly, on every bottle that proudly carries the words, bottled in bond. Most bourbon pioneers built a distillery, but E.H. Taylor helped build an industry because before consumers could trust bourbon, someone had to make bourbon trustworthy. More than a century later, when you see the words bottled in bond on a label, you still know exactly what you're getting. One distiller, one season, 4 years, 100 proof, and perhaps most importantly, accountability. And you can trust it, thanks in large part to Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. For today's pairing, we're honoring one of the bourbon's great reformers. The bourbon is E.H. Taylor Small Batch Bottled in Bond, a whiskey that reflects the standards Taylor fought to establish more than a century ago. The cigar is the Oliva O Maduro, a cigar built on craftsmanship, tradition, and doing things the right way. Together, they create a pairing built on quality and trust. Jack Daniel built a brand. George Remus built an empire. W.L. Weller changed the whiskey. The Beams beat a dynasty. Pappy Van Winkle became a myth. But Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. gave bourbon something it desperately needed: credibility. And so until next time, keep your sticks lit, keep your spirits high. Cheers.